Hello everyone, welcome back to our Flutter Memory Match Game series. Today's video is going to be exciting as we will be updating our game's code to enable web support and host it on AWS Amplify hosting. Enabling web support will allow us to run our game on web browsers, making it accessible to a wider audience, and hosting it on AWS Amplify will ensure that our game is available to users around the world with high performance and scalability. First, I created the file gameboards.dart inside the widgets folder. The game board is a stateful widget. It initialized with a game level value, which determines the difficulty level of the game. In the initState method, the widget creates a new instance of the game class and starts a timer that increments the duration of the game by 1 second until the game is over. The Restart Game widget is displayed on top of the game board, and it contains buttons to pause, restart, and continue the game. The Game Timer widget displays the duration of the game. The Grid View widget contains a grid of memory cards that are generated using the Memory Card widget. The Memory Card widget takes the index of the card object, and an onCardBrest function as arguments. The KIsWeb boolean is used to determine the aspect ratio of the cards. If the game is being played on the web, the aspect ratio is calculated based on the screen size. Otherwise, the aspect ratio is multiplied by 2 to make the cards more visible on mobile devices. Next, I created the Dart file Memory Match Page Mobile inside the Pages folder. The Memory Match Page Mobile is a stateless widget that requires an integer game level as input. The main content of the page is the game board widget, which is responsible for rendering the memory match game board based on the game level input. Then I created the memory match page web.dart file inside the pages folder. The memory match page web widget is a stateless widget, which is responsible for rendering the game board for the web version of the memory match game. It is similar to the memory match page mobile, but has some modifications to make it responsive to different screen size. The Layout Builder widget provides the constraints on the available space for the widget to build in. The Animated Container widget is used to animate the widget when the size changes. It has a duration of 500 milliseconds. The padding of the Animated Container widget is set to 0 if the constraints.max width is less than 500. If the constraints.max width is greater than or equal to 500, then the padding is set to 330. The child of the animated container is a center containing a container. The container widget is used to constrain the width of the game board to a maximum width of 700. The child of the container widget is a game board widget with the game level passed as a parameter. I updated the game controls bottom sheet so that when the user clicks on the quit button, the app will navigate to the startup page and remove all routes from the stack except for the first one. I updated the Route Builder method inside the Game Options widget so that it will return either a Memory Match Page Web or a Memory Match Page Mobile widget, depending on whether the app is running on the web or on mobile platform. I updated the Game Timer widget to set the text align to center for the text widget responsible of displaying the time value. I updated the build method of the restart game widget to return an icon button widget that displays the replay pause icon. When the icon is clicked, the unpressed callback is called. If the game is over, it calls the navigate back function to navigate the user back to the startup page. If the game is not over, it calls the show game controls method to show the game controls model bottom sheet. I created the script file, create and copy to folder. Here I introduced a shell script to automate the process of building and copying the files generated by the Flutter web application to a new directory named artifacts. The code deletes any previously existing artifacts directory, creates a new one, and copies all the files and directories generated by the Flutter web application into the artifacts directory. The code is now complete. Let's run the app using Chrome browser. The app ran successfully and I can choose a game level. I can use the bottom sheet options to go back and choose a different game levels. Next, let's look into deploying the app to AWS Amplify. I committed the code into GitHub and now I need to create a new GitHub action for the deployment. This will create a new YAML file for the workflow. The workflow will build and deploy the Flutter web application. It consists of a single job named build and deploy web. It gets triggered by pushes to the main branch of the repo. The job contains the following steps. First, it checks out the repo using the action checkout. Next, it uses a Flutter action to install Flutter and set the channel to stable. Then, it uses the command flutter config to enable web support. After that, it runs the command flutter pub-get to fetch dependencies. Next, it builds the application using flutter build web command. Then it will run the bash script that we created, create and copy to folder script. Finally, it will commit the artifacts to the repo. Note the contents permission is set to write to allow the actions to write to the repo. Next, let's set up AWS Amplify. On Amplify hosting landing page, I clicked on Host Your Web App and signed in into my AWS account. This will open the AWS Amplify console. I selected GitHub and clicked Continue. I clicked on the Authorize button to go back to the Amplify console. I then clicked View GitHub Permissions. Here I selected the account and the repo of the Memory Match Game. On Amplify console, I selected the repo. The branch is set to main. I enabled the option connected to a monorepo to pick a folder. I entered artifacts web. Then I clicked next. I enabled the checkbox to allow Amplify to deploy all the files. I then clicked next to get the review screen. Here I clicked Save and Deploy. This will create an Amplify app for the game, and it will create a hosting environment. Amplify will provision, build, and deploy the required resources for the hosting. The game is now deployed, and I can use the generated URL to test it. Instead of the generated URL, I wanted to use my own URL, so I selected Domain Management from the side options. I then selected Add Domain button. I entered the URL and clicked Configure Domain. I then clicked the Save button. Amplify will create and configure an SSL for this new URL. For the domain activation, I needed to use the domain provider dashboard to add the CNAME record as per the instructions from Amplify. Once this complete, the domain will be fully activated and available. Now I can use my own URL to test the game.